Now we are going to discuss neck and thoracic injuries. Neck and thoracic injuries. Okay. And first we want to discuss the basics. Now see first the neck injuries. Okay. See, in neck injuries, the major vascular structures and aerodigestive structures, these are located in the anterior triangle and deep to platysma. So what do you mean by major vascular structures? Major vascular structures in neck means carotid vessels, and aerodigestive structures means trachea and esophagus. So carotid vessels and trachea and esophagus, this is located in anterior triangle, means anterior to sternocleidomastoid, and these structures are located deep to platysma. Okay, so what are the two most useful landmarks in the neck injuries? One is platysma and another is sternocleidomastoid. Clear? Now imagine if there is a patient of neck injury who is brought to your emergency and you evaluated that platysma is intact. Okay, and if platysma is intact, it means there is only superficial injury. The structures located deep to platysma are intact, so no further evaluation is recommended. But if platysma is breached, in that case we have to go for the further investigation. Now see sternocleidomastoid. If there is injury anterior to sternocleidomastoid, it means there is high likelihood of injury of its structures, carotid vessels and aerodigestive structures. And if there is injury posterior to sternocleidomastoid, it means there is very low risk of injury to carotid vessels and aerodigestive structures. But what is the problem? If there is a penetrating trauma in the posterior triangle, means posterior to sternocleidomastoid, so in that case we can suspect the injury to the cervical spine and spinal cord. Okay, so first important point, that what are the most useful boundaries in neck injuries? So in neck injuries, the most useful boundaries are first platysma and the second is sternocleidomastoid. Okay, now two situation. If platysma is intact, if it's intact, in that case no further investigation. Why? Because it's a superficial injury, right? And if it is breached, so if platysma is breached, in that case further investigations are required. So we go for further investigation. Why? To assess whether the carotid vessels, aerodigestive structures are injured or not. Okay, now see sternocleidomastoid. If there is injury anterior to sternocleidomastoid, or injury can be posterior. If it is anterior, what happens? There is high risk or increased risk of injury to first carotid vessels, right, and aerodigestive structures like trachea and esophagus. If the injury is posterior to sternocleidomastoid, in that case there is low risk of injury to carotid vessels and aerodigestive structure. Specifically in cases of penetrating trauma, to the posterior triangle. So imagine a situation where in posterior triangle there is penetrating trauma. In that case there is increased risk of injury to cervical spine and spinal cord. Clear? So these are important landmarks. One is platysma and one is sternocleidomastoid. After that there is another question which is frequently asked, that what are the zones in the neck injuries? So there are three zones in the neck injuries. See, so what are the zones in the neck injury? If you see this zone 1, that is of green color, light green, so this is the suprasternal notch and there is cricoid cartilage. So between suprasternal notch and cricoid cartilage there is zone 1. After that, between this cricoid cartilage and angle of mandible there is zone 2. And what is the location of zone 3? From this angle of mandible to the base of skull. So here there is base of skull. Clear? So these are the three zones. Now see the important points related to these three zones. So here you can see two pictures. This is the anterior aspect and this is the lateral aspect, right? Now see the anterior aspect first. Here you can see out of zone 1, zone 2 and zone 3, you can see which one is most exposed. Which zone? So see, the most exposed is zone 2. So zone 2 is most exposed. And if zone 2 is most exposed, this is most surgically accessible zone and this is most commonly injured zone. So zone 2 is most exposed, most commonly injured and most surgically accessible zone. Okay. Now see the content of zone 1. If you see the content of zone 1, can you see here there is trachea and what you can see, carotid artery. So there is presence of carotid vessels. Anterior aspect. Now if you see the lateral aspect, you can see in zone 1 there is trachea, carotid artery and what else? Esophagus. So in zone 1, carotid vessels and aerodigestive structures are most superficial. That's why injuries of zone 1 are fatal. Why injuries of zone 1 are fatal? Because there is high risk of injury of carotid vessels. Clear? So see the important points related to the zones. One by one we are going to discuss. So this zone 1, we discussed that zone 1, it's located between suprasternal notch to cricoid cartilage. Suprasternal notch to cricoid cartilage. Clear? What are the structures located? The structures located are carotid vessels and aerodigestive structures, means trachea and esophagus. Trachea and esophagus. Simple. So why the injuries of zone 1 are fatal? Injuries are fatal. Why? Because there is injury of carotid vessels. So because of injuries of carotid vessels, right, zone 1 injuries, these are fatal. Simple. We discussed zone 2. What was the important points related to zone 2? Related to zone 2, first, location between cricoid cartilage to angle of mandible. So it is located between cricoid cartilage to angle of mandible. Clear? And see the questions which are asked. Now see the questions related to zone 2. This is most exposed, right? And since it is most exposed, it is most surgically accessible and this is the most commonly injured zone. So this is most commonly injured and this is most accessible zone. Surgically, this is most accessible, right? And see the zone 3. Zone 3. So zone 3 is located between angle of mandible to base of skull. So it is located between angle of mandible to base of skull. Okay, so angle of mandible to base of skull. So these are the important points related to zones of neck injuries. Now we are going to discuss thoracic injuries. Okay, so thoracic injuries. So first question, that what is the most common thoracic injuries? Most common thoracic injuries are chest wall injuries, right? After that, there is another question which is frequently asked, that what is the most common cause of death in blunt trauma and in penetrating trauma? So in thoracic injuries, the most common cause of mortality in blunt trauma is the tracheobronchial injuries. Tracheobronchial injuries, and the most common cause of mortality in penetrating trauma is the hemothorax. Why? Because of pulmonary laceration. Okay, so two important questions which are asked. First, most common thoracic injuries are, these are chest wall injuries. These are chest wall injuries. Okay. After that, most common cause of mortality. So most common cause of mortality, okay, in blunt trauma and in penetrating trauma, right? So we discussed that in blunt trauma it is tracheobronchial injuries and in penetrating trauma it's hemothorax because of pulmonary laceration. So here this is tracheobronchial injuries and in penetrating trauma it's the hemothorax because of pulmonary lacerations. One by one we are going to discuss the thoracic injuries. First and foremost is rib fracture, which is frequently asked in exam. Now see the rib cage, okay? So generally in rib fracture generally you will notice that there is fracture of ribs which are located in the center. It is very uncommon to find the fracture of rib which is located at the top or the rib which is located at the bottom. So it's uncommon to find the fracture of first rib and fracture of 10th, 11th and 12th rib. You must be knowing that 11th and 12th ribs are also called floating ribs. Okay. So generally the rib fracture is present in the center of the rib cage. Commonly, it is very uncommon to find the fracture of first rib, 10th, 11th, 12th rib. Okay. So suppose in a patient there is fracture. So what is the cause of rib fracture? See, so it is secondary to compression. So what kind of compression? If this is the rib cage, so it is because of either lateral compression or because of anterior-posterior compression. Right? There was one question in AIIMS that during CPCR, which ribs are most commonly fractured? So in CPCR, we are putting this part of hand and doing the compression. So generally the hand is placed in the center of chest. So generally, what are the ribs which are most commonly fractured during CPCR? So this is 4th, 5th and 6th, right? So first important point that in CPCR or during CPCR, what are the most commonly fractured rib? And that is 4th to 6th rib. Clear? First rib and 10th to 12th rib fracture, this is uncommon. Okay, so fracture of first rib and 10th to 12th rib, this is uncommon, but sometimes we are going to find the fracture of first rib or 10th to 12th rib, and if these fractures are present, it means there is high velocity impact. So if there is fracture, it suggests high velocity impact. Clear? Second, in relation to fracture or in relation to rib, you can predict that which structures will be injured if the rib is fractured. Now, if you see the relation of this first rib, you know that in relation to first rib, there is subclavian vessels. So there is subclavian artery and vein, and there is relation of what? Brachial plexus. Simultaneously, you notice that there is apex of lung, which is also indirectly related to first rib. So whenever a patient is having first rib fracture, we are going to suspect the injuries of subclavian vessels, brachial plexus and apex of lung. Now see the injury of 10th, 11th, 12th rib. If you see the right side, here you find an organ. So there is one organ located here. So what is this organ? So this is the liver. So whenever there is fracture of 10th, 11th, 12th rib, on right side we are going to suspect the injury of liver. And if you see on the left side we suspect the injury of spleen. Clear? So see the important points. In first rib fracture, we are going to suspect the injury of subclavian vessels. So this is artery, this is vein, and brachial plexus. So here you can see this is brachial plexus, and what else? Apex of lung. Clear? So in first rib fracture, we are going to suspect the injuries of subclavian vessels, brachial plexus, and apex of lung. And now see this diagram. So in the rib fracture, which ribs? If there is fracture of 10th to 12th ribs, clear? In these cases, on right side we suspect the injury of liver, and on left side we suspect the injury of spleen. And you must be knowing that what is the relation of spleen. Spleen is in relation to 3 ribs, 9th, 10th and 11th, and you must be knowing the long axis of spleen is in relation to 10th rib. So it is in relation to 9th, 10th, 11th ribs, and the long axis of spleen is in relation to 10th rib. Now, how we are going to manage the patients of rib fracture? Most of the patients are managed conservatively. So what we have to provide? We have to provide the adequate analgesia to the patient. And in rib fracture, we have to avoid the strapping. Okay. So how we manage? Management. It's the conservative management. Clear? So generally, we have to provide adequate analgesia. Adequate analgesia. And what should not be done? Generally, we should avoid strapping. So in rib fracture, strapping should not be done. Now in this image, what you can see, here you can see that there is sternal fracture. Clear? And what kind of sternal fracture is there? There is transverse sternal fracture. Now see, generally sternal fracture is uncommon, and in any patient, if there is sternal fracture, we have to suspect the severe intrathoracic injury. Why? Because high velocity impact is suspected. And where exactly you are going to find? You notice that this is transverse, and generally the fracture in sternum is mainly located in upper or mid portion, right? So sternal fractures are uncommon. And what kind of fractures are there? You have seen that it's transverse. Generally, it is located in upper or mid portion of body. Okay. So what are the signs of sternal fracture? So if there is sternal fracture, there is tenderness, there is deformity, and you will notice that there is swelling. So the signs of sternal fracture. So the patient is having tenderness, there is swelling and deformity. And we discussed that it's uncommon. And whenever sternal fracture is there, generally we have to suspect high velocity impact. And that's why if sternal fracture is there, we have to suspect severe intrathoracic injury. So what we have to suspect? In sternal fractures, we suspect severe intrathoracic injuries. Okay, severe intrathoracic injuries. Okay, and in sternal fracture there is specific injury to which particular structure? Myocardium. So severe intrathoracic injuries are suspected, and there is specific injury to the myocardium. So how we are going to manage? See, the management is almost similar to rib fracture. So like rib fracture, we have to provide the adequate analgesia, and patient should be having good pulmonary hygiene, right? So question is asked that what are the indications of surgical intervention? Sometimes there is displaced fracture. So if there is displaced fracture, in that case only surgical intervention is required. So see the management of sternal fracture. Generally, the patients are managed conservatively, so there is conservative management. What's the component? We have to provide adequate analgesia, right? And patient should be having good pulmonary hygiene. Clear? So we encourage the patient for the exercises also. What are the indications of surgical intervention? Surgical intervention is only done when the patient is having displaced sternal fracture. Okay, so if the patient is having displaced sternal fracture, Now we are going to discuss hemothorax. Okay, so what is the literal meaning of hemothorax? So hemo means presence of blood and thorax means in the pleural space. So hemothorax means presence of blood in the pleural space. Next important point, what is the most common cause of hemothorax? So you have seen in trauma patients hemothorax. So the most common cause of hemothorax is trauma. In AIIMS there was one question that what is the most common cause of massive hemothorax? So most common cause of hemothorax is trauma. Sometimes in trauma there is rib fracture, and because of rib fracture there is torn intercostal vessels, and these vessels are going to bleed profusely, and because of that there is collection of blood. So the massive hemothorax, what's the cause? It's because of torn intercostal vessels secondary to rib fracture. Okay, so two most important points in hemothorax: the most common cause, and that's trauma. Clear? Now second important point, the most common cause of massive hemothorax. Massive hemothorax. Clear? So what's the problem? Because of trauma there is rib fracture, and because of this rib fracture, what's the problem? There is torn intercostal vessels. So it's the torn intercostal vessels secondary to rib fracture which are responsible for massive hemothorax. Now see, generally you have seen the trauma patients. When a patient of trauma is brought to your emergency, there is trauma to the chest. At the time of presentation, patient was having dyspnea and tachypnea. Right? So you suspected what? The thoracic injury. Now you are going to perform the examination. Okay. So if you are going to perform the percussion, you notice that there is dull note. Why? Because fluid is collected. And on auscultation, there is absent breath sounds. So dyspnea, tachypnea, dull note on percussion and absent breath sound. It means fluid is collected, and in trauma patients, obviously which fluid? Blood. So see the clinical findings. Clinical findings. So generally these patients have dyspnea, these patients have tachypnea, and on examination there is dull note. You must be knowing that in patients where there is pneumothorax, obviously there is resonant note, so there is dull note and absent breath sounds. Simple. Absent breath sounds. Right? So I suspected hemothorax. So in emergency, how I'm going to confirm? I have to insert the needle in pleural space and I have to aspirate the pleural fluid. On aspiration, if it's blood, aspiration of pleural fluid is done, and if it's blood, it means patient is having what? Hemothorax. So diagnosis you can make, but you want to assess the extent of involvement, how much fluid is collected, and for that we send the patient for chest x-ray. Okay, so how we are going to make the diagnosis? In emergency, needle aspiration of pleural fluid. So on needle aspiration of pleural fluid, there is presence of blood. Clear? And we send the patient for chest x-ray. Why? To assess the extent and presence. To assess the extent and presence of fluid collection. Clear? So to assess the extent and presence of pleural fluid collection, we send the patient for chest x-ray. Now see how x-ray looks like. So in this x-ray you can see what? That this is the left lung, which is almost normal. On right side you can see that what? This right lung is collapsed, and here what? There is presence of fluid collection. Since it's a trauma patient, so there is collection of blood. So this is hemothorax. Clear? This patient is having blood collection in the pleural space. Now how we are going to manage the patients of hemothorax? You have seen in emergency. So this patient is having blood collection in the pleural space, and you have seen how we are going to manage the patients of hemothorax in emergency. We are supposed to insert the ICD. So intercostal drain insertion. In which intercostal space? Fifth intercostal space. Where? In triangle of safety, exactly in the anterior axillary line. Okay, so see the management of hemothorax. We have to insert ICD ICD insertion, intercostal drain insertion in fifth intercostal space. Where exactly? In triangle of safety, and it's in anterior axillary line. So where we are going to insert the chest tube or intercostal drain? In anterior axillary line. Many times examiners are asking the boundaries of triangle of safety. See, so what are the boundaries of triangle of safety? You can see anteriorly there is lateral border of pectoralis major, and laterally, if you see the laterally, there is lateral border of latissimus dorsi. So here you can see anteriorly lateral border of pectoralis major, laterally lateral border of latissimus dorsi, and if you see the base is formed by a line passing from fifth intercostal space. So this is the fifth intercostal space, and this is a line passing from fifth intercostal space, and apex is formed by base of axilla. So these are the boundaries of triangle of safety, and we are supposed to insert the ICD in fifth intercostal space in anterior axillary line. In emergency, you have seen many patients of thoracic trauma, especially the patients who are having hemothorax, pneumothorax or tension pneumothorax, and you have noticed that in these patients we are going to insert the ICD, means intercostal drain. Okay, so generally ICD insertion is done in these patients. Rarely you have seen that we are going to perform thoracotomy in patients who are having thoracic trauma, right? So what are those indications where we have to go for thoracotomy in patients of thoracic trauma? So see the indications. Indications of thoracotomy. Indications of thoracotomy. This is very, very important. It is frequently asked in exams. Okay, now see, whenever we are going to insert a chest tube, suppose there is a patient of hemothorax, and you inserted chest tube. Just after insertion of chest tube, whenever the intercostal drainage or thoracostomy drainage is more than 1000 ml in patients of penetrating trauma, and thoracostomy drainage is more than 1500 ml in patients of blunt trauma, it means you have to go for thoracotomy. Why? Because it is an indication that some major vessel is injured. Second situation, you inserted the chest tube and you notice that for consecutive 3 hours, the thoracostomy drainage is more than 200 ml. So if it's more than 200 ml for consecutive 3 hours, it means there is some active bleeder inside. So we have to go inside and we have to perform the ligation by thoracotomy. Clear? So see the indications. First, initial, after chest tube insertion, initial tube thoracostomy drainage. How much? More than 1000 ml in penetrating trauma, and more than 1500 ml in blunt trauma. So more than 1500 ml in blunt trauma. These are the two most frequently asked questions, most frequently asked indications. Second, after chest tube insertion, there is ongoing tube thoracostomy drainage. And how much? This value is important. How much? So more than 200 ml, for 3 consecutive hours. 3 consecutive hours. And in which patients? In non-coagulopathic patients. Which patients? Non-coagulopathic patient. It means there is some bleeder inside. So in non-coagulopathic patients. Simple. Now third indication. Imagine there is a patient, and in patient you inserted the bilateral chest tube. Chest tube was inserted on both sides and you notice that there is caked hemothorax. So what is the third indication? It's the caked hemothorax. Caked hemothorax. Okay. After bilateral ICD insertion or chest tube insertion. Okay, so these are important indications which you have to remember. These values you have to remember. Rest are the common sense indications. What are those? Have a look. Now, how to remember the other indications? See, you have to remember these values. These values are important. So these values in penetrating trauma, how much? More than 1000 ml. In blunt trauma, 1500 ml, or 200 ml, more than 200 ml drainage for consecutive 3 hours. Now, rest of the indications are easy to remember. See how you can remember. Apart from lung, in thorax, apart from lung, what are the other organs? So there is heart, there is trachea, there is bronchi, there is esophagus, there is aorta, descending aorta, and major vessels. So if there is injury of any of these structures, these will be indications for thoracotomy. Like if there is tracheobronchial injury, it's an indication. So see, if there is injury to descending thoracic aorta or injury to great vessels, that is an indication. Related to heart, if patient is having pericardial tamponade or there is cardiac herniation, these are indications. If patient is having esophageal perforation, that's an indication. Apart from this, if there is massive air leak from chest tube with inadequate ventilation, and sometimes patients who are having open pneumothorax, that is also an indication. So this is the list of indications for thoracotomy. So what you have to remember, the values: more than 1000 ml in penetrating trauma, more than 1500 ml in blunt trauma, and more than 200 ml for 3 consecutive hours. These are the tube thoracostomy drainage which is asked in exam. Now we are going to discuss tension pneumothorax, and you should know that this topic is asked in each and every paper of AIIMS. Tension pneumothorax, very important topic. So see, tension pneumothorax. Okay, so what is the basic problem in this tension pneumothorax? Okay, so in this case there is one-way valve air leak, and this one-way valve air leak is there from the chest or it can occur from the lungs. So the main problem in this patient is that there is one-way valve air leak. Okay, this will explain everything, either from chest wall or from lungs or from both. Okay, so what is the pathophysiology? Have a look. Now here you can see there is penetrating trauma to the chest wall and there is injury to the lungs. Clear? And because of that there is formation of one-way valve air leak. Now imagine if there is penetrating trauma in the chest wall and there is formation of this one-way valve. So what happens? During inspiration, our chest cavity moves out and there is negative pressure inside the chest. So what will happen? This one-way valve will open. And when it's going to open, what will happen? Because of negative pressure, air will come inside the thorax. So what will happen? Here you notice that air enters into thoracic cavity. And here air is pushed inside the thoracic cavity and it is collected under tension. Why? Because this air is not able to escape. Why? Because in expiration, when there is positive pressure, the valve is closed. So what? Inspiration, valve is open, air is coming inside the thoracic cavity. Expiration, valve is closed, so air is retained inside. It is not able to go out. Now imagine if there is penetrating trauma to the lungs, or whenever there is tracheobronchial injury. Now just imagine a balloon. In a balloon in deflated state, I am going to puncture the balloon. Okay, I punctured a balloon in deflated state. Now imagine the balloon. Whenever I am going to inflate the balloon, the site of puncture is going to enlarge. Clear? Same thing happens with lungs. If there is a puncture site or site of injury during inspiration, when the lung expands, that site of injury is going to enlarge. So what happens? There is air leak. And during expiration, when lung is going to collapse, what happens? Air is not able to escape. So ultimately here also what is happening, that air is collected or air is forced into thoracic cavity and it is collected under tension. So this happens in tension pneumothorax. Since air is collected under tension over a period of time, what is going to happen? You will notice that this air is going to compress the ipsilateral lung, right? So what will happen? Ipsilateral lung is compressed. One. Second, you notice that there is first collapse of ipsilateral lung. Second, you can notice that there is shift of mediastinum because of high pressure. Clear? Because air is collected under tension, there is high pressure on that side of thorax. Third problem, you can see there is depressed diaphragm. What is the problem? There is depressed diaphragm. Clear? And what else can you see? This is superior vena cava and this is inferior vena cava. There is compression or distortion, and because of this compression or distortion, what happens? There is decreased venous return. So there is decreased venous return. I'm repeating. So because of air collected under tension, collapse of ipsilateral lung, shift of mediastinum to opposite side, depressed diaphragm, distortion of vena cava leading to decreased venous return. So these are the pathophysiological changes which are seen in tension pneumothorax. You have seen patients of tension pneumothorax in emergency. So these patients at the time of presentation, they have dyspnea, tachypnea, right? They have distended neck veins, and whenever we are performing the examination, we perform the percussion, we notice what? That there is hyperresonance in affected hemithorax. If you perform the percussion, if you perform the auscultation, you are going to notice that there is absent breath sounds. Clear? So these are the clinical manifestations. What are the causes of tension pneumothorax? Have a look. So see the etiology of tension pneumothorax. Etiology. So tension pneumothorax can be caused by both penetrating trauma and blunt trauma. So whenever there is penetrating trauma to the chest wall, there is formation of one-way valve leading to air leak. And because of this blunt trauma, what's the problem? There is tracheobronchial injuries. So in blunt trauma, it can lead to tracheobronchial injuries which can cause the tension pneumothorax. You have noticed in ICU that anesthetists are going to insert the central line, especially in this subclavian vein. So when they are inserting the central line in this subclavian vein, apex of lung is injured. So in that case also tension pneumothorax can occur. So iatrogenic lung puncture, especially during central line insertion via subclavian vein, when we are inserting the central line, and if we give mechanical positive pressure ventilation, because of high pressure there is lung rupture or injury to the lungs, and because of this what? Tension pneumothorax can occur. Okay, now see what are the clinical features. So we discussed, so these patients have dyspnea, there is tachypnea, and we discussed there is distended neck veins. Distended neck veins. Right? Now, what are the findings on percussion, hyperresonance, and auscultation? Absent breath sounds. So on percussion, there is hyperresonance, and on auscultation, there is absent breath sounds. Clear? So there is absent breath sounds. Okay, and these patients are also having hypotension, right? So patients have hypotension also. Now most of the times in AIIMS there is a clinical picture of trauma, and they will describe it that patient is having dyspnea, patient is not able to speak, or patient is going to speak only 1 or 2 words. There is increased respiratory rate. On percussion there is hyperresonance. On auscultation there is absent breath sound. What should be the next best step? So first thing, we have to make the diagnosis of tension pneumothorax, and see, it's a clinical diagnosis. On the basis of clinical suspicion only, we have to insert a wide bore needle in second intercostal space in mid-clavicular line. We are not supposed to send the patient to radiology department, because sometimes if you are going to send the patient to radiology department, patient might expire. So it's a clinical diagnosis. See here, flail chest as well as tension pneumothorax, both are clinical diagnosis, right? So diagnosis, it's clinical diagnosis, right? Sometimes they will provide you x-ray, means suppose x-ray was done, what are the x-ray findings? So we discussed it. So in pathophysiology we discussed that air is collected under tension, and can you see the lung shadow here? So ipsilateral lung is collapsed, and if you see the diaphragm, so there is depressed diaphragm, and if you see the mediastinum, there is shift of mediastinum. So what are the findings here? Ipsilateral lung, it's collapsed. There is depressed diaphragm, here you can see depressed diaphragm, and what else you can see? That there is shift of mediastinum, shift of mediastinum. This is another image based question which is frequently asked in AIIMS. So these are the findings. By the way, the diagnosis is clinical. So on the basis of suspicion only, we have to insert a wide bore needle in second intercostal space in mid clavicular line. But see, this is an older concept. According to ATLS 2018 updates, if patient is an adult, rather than inserting the wide bore needle in second intercostal space, in adults we are inserting the wide bore needle in fifth intercostal space. In fifth intercostal space, slightly anterior to mid axillary line. So actually speaking, which line? Anterior axillary line. I'm repeating. We have to insert wide bore needle. Clear? Where exactly? In children, second intercostal space in mid clavicular line. This was the older concept. So according to new concept, this is followed for children. Okay. So if a patient is child, there we insert the wide bore needle in second intercostal space in mid clavicular line. According to ATLS update 2018, ATLS update 2018, what's the change? In adults, we have to insert the wide bore needle in fifth intercostal space, and where? Slightly anterior to mid axillary line. And actually speaking, it is anterior axillary line. Clear? So I'm repeating. What's the treatment? In children, wide bore needle in second intercostal space in mid clavicular line. In adults, wide bore needle in fifth intercostal space in anterior axillary line. This is emergency treatment. And what is the treatment of choice? ICD insertion in fifth intercostal space in triangle of safety. Okay, so this is emergency treatment. And what is the treatment of choice for tension pneumothorax? So that's ICD insertion. Where exactly? In triangle of safety. Triangle of safety. And in which intercostal space? Obviously, fifth intercostal space. Clear? So you have to remember, because this question was asked in AIIMS, they asked that the wide bore needle should be inserted in which intercostal space, second or fifth, and age of the patient was 20 years. So obviously it is the fifth intercostal space. So this is how we manage the patients of tension pneumothorax. Another important topic which is asked in medicine as well as in surgery, and that is pericardial tamponade. Pericardial tamponade. Okay. Now here, what is the problem? In this case, there is rapid accumulation of blood or fluid in pericardial space. So what is the cause? The catchy word is rapid accumulation of blood or fluid. So it is caused by rapid accumulation of blood or fluid in pericardial space. Clear? See, even 200 ml of fluid or blood collected rapidly. So there is rapid accumulation of even 200 ml of blood, and it can cause what? Pericardial tamponade. So we have seen that in majority of cases of trauma, what's the cause? The patients of trauma who are having pericardial tamponade, majority of those patients are having penetrating trauma. So generally it is caused by penetrating trauma. And there is a famous question which is asked that what are the clinical features of pericardial tamponade, and you must be knowing that it is characterized by a famous triad known as Bake's triad. So see the clinical features. It is characterized by Bake's triad, right? So what are the components of Bake's triad? The components are, first, muffled heart sound. There is distended neck veins, and hypotension. Clear? So how to remember? There is a mnemonic, and the mnemonic is MDH. Can you see MDH? So asli masale such. So Bake's triad is MDH. Muffled heart sound, distended neck veins, and hypotension. Now see how we are going to make the diagnosis. Suppose chest X-ray is done. So if chest X-ray is done, in the chest X-ray, can you see what you can notice? That there is enlarged cardiac shadow. And the investigation of choice for diagnosis, it's the echocardiography. Okay. So if we send the patient for chest X-ray, you notice that on chest X-ray, there is enlarged cardiac shadow. Clear? But the investigation of choice for diagnosis, it's echocardiography. So that is echocardiography. Okay. Now see how we are going to manage. In patients of pericardial tamponade, there is emergency management and there is definitive management. So emergency management is that we are going to insert the needle in pericardial space and we are going to aspirate the fluid or blood. So this is needle pericardiocentesis, and this is emergency treatment. What is the treatment of choice? We have to drain the fluid by pericardiotomy. Okay. So management. The emergency treatment, and that is needle pericardiocentesis. Clear? And what is the treatment of choice? It is drainage after pericardiotomy. Right? Now see, generally in AIIMS, they give the clinical scenario similar to tension pneumothorax and pericardial tamponade, and they are going to ask you what is the condition. Now what are the similarities between pericardial tamponade and tension pneumothorax? You noticed that in both of these patients, there is distended neck veins and hypotension. So in pericardial tamponade and in tension pneumothorax, distended neck veins and hypotension is there. But this muffled heart sound, it is seen in pericardial tamponade, muffled heart sound, and in tension pneumothorax, there is absent breath sounds. Clear? So you can easily differentiate these two on the basis of heart sounds and breath sounds. So muffled heart sound will be seen in the condition or pathology of heart, that is pericardial tamponade, and absent breath sounds will be related to lungs, so that is what tension pneumothorax. So muffled heart sounds in pericardial tamponade, absent breath sounds in tension pneumothorax. Another condition which is frequently asked, and that is flail chest. This is famous topic which is asked especially in NEET. Flail chest. Okay. So what is the question? They ask you the definition. So what is the definition of flail chest? According to ATLS 2018 update, is the fracture of two or more than two consecutive ribs. Fracture of two or more than two consecutive ribs fractured at two or more than two places. Now see two examples. Imagine there is fracture of this rib here, and fracture of this rib here. So three ribs are fractured and these are not consecutive, and these ribs are fractured at one place. So this is going to fit in the definition of flail chest? No. Now see this example. If these three ribs are fractured, so these three ribs are consecutive ribs fractured at two places. Clear? So this is going to fit in the definition of flail chest. So what's the definition? When there is fracture of two or more than two, the catchy word is consecutive ribs. Consecutive ribs fractured at two or more than two places. Clear? So it's fracture of two or more than two consecutive ribs at two or more than two places. So what will happen because of this? You can see this part of chest wall is isolated. Clear? So this part of chest wall is going to lose its continuity with the thoracic cage. Now what is the problem in this case? In this case, since this part of chest wall is isolated, so see the problems, pathophysiology. So whenever after trauma, patient is going to do the inspiration and expiration, see the problem. During inspiration, when there is negative pressure inside and the chest wall moves out, so chest wall moves out but there is negative pressure, that's why this isolated part of chest moves inside. And during expiration, when there is positive pressure inside but the chest cavity moves in, because of this positive pressure, this part of chest wall moves out. So this is known as what? Paradoxical respiration. And because of this paradoxical respiration, what's the problem? Can you see the fractured ends are going to rub each other, and because of this rubbing there is severe pain. And if there is pain, what is the problem? So because of this pain, there is voluntary splinting and impaired chest wall movement. What is the problem? So initially when there is trauma, patient is doing inspiration and expiration like this, right? So he noticed that this is the site of injury. So what happens? There is splinting, voluntary splinting, and now patient started having this kind of respiration. Can you see? Clear? So there is voluntary splinting and impaired chest wall movement. Because of all these three factors, what's the problem? There is increased risk of respiratory failure. Okay, so in flail chest, since there is isolated chest wall, so because of this, what are the problems? First, there is paradoxical respiration. Second, there is voluntary splinting because of pain, and there is mechanically impaired chest wall movement. Mechanically impaired chest wall movement. Clear? And because of all these things, what's the problem? Yes, there is increased risk of respiratory failure, right? So this is one of the factor. The patients of flail chest are also having pulmonary contusion, right? So because of all these factors, there is increased risk of respiratory failure, and the patients are also having pulmonary contusion, which also increases the risk of respiratory failure. But all patients are not having respiratory failure. Now, how we are going to make the diagnosis? So we discussed in tension pneumothorax that flail chest and the diagnosis of tension pneumothorax is made clinically. So how we are going to make the diagnosis? It is diagnosed clinically. Clear? So how you are going to make the diagnosis? Observe the patient for number of respiratory cycles. So when you are observing the patients, and especially its respiratory cycle, the inspiration and expiration, during some time you are going to notice that there is paradoxical respiration. So what happens? The chest cavity moves out, but the isolated part of chest wall goes in, and chest cavity moves in, and that part of isolated chest wall goes out. And if you don't have patience, you want to diagnose it immediately. So you ask the patient to cough. Ask the patient to cough. So when patient is doing coughing, for coughing the chest wall goes in, but that isolated part of chest wall goes out because of positive pressure created inside the thorax. Clear? So ask the patient to cough, chest cavity moves in, but that isolated part of chest wall goes out. So this is how we make the diagnosis. Now coming to the treatment. Students are going to do this mistake in exam. In exam, the question is asked that what is the treatment of choice of flail chest? So if a patient is having only flail chest, there is no respiratory failure, in that case we give oxygen. So oxygen administration, the main component is adequate analgesia, generally by epidural analgesia, and we provide physiotherapy. That's it. If patient is having respiratory failure, then only we go for intermittent positive pressure ventilation. So see the management. So in flail chest, the management is oxygen administration. We provide adequate analgesia, and generally we provide this by epidural analgesia. So epidural analgesia and physiotherapy, right? But see, in exam, in option, oxygen administration and physiotherapy is generally not mentioned. They ask the question that what is the treatment of choice of flail chest? Adequate analgesia and second, intermittent positive pressure ventilation. So the treatment of flail chest is adequate analgesia, and the treatment of choice for flail chest with respiratory failure is intermittent positive pressure ventilation. Okay, so if patient is having flail chest and with flail chest there is respiratory failure, so if there is respiratory failure, then we go for intermittent positive pressure ventilation. Clear? So these are the important points related to flail chest. Now we are going to discuss diaphragmatic injury. Diaphragmatic injury. Okay, so diaphragmatic injury can be caused by both blunt trauma as well as penetrating trauma. So it can be caused by both blunt trauma or penetrating trauma, but the most common cause is penetrating trauma or penetrating injury. So where in the body there is penetrating injury, so that you are going to suspect the diaphragmatic injury. Now see, if the penetrating injury is below the nipple and above the costal margin, so below the nipple and above the costal margin, if there is penetrating trauma, you have to suspect the diaphragmatic injury. What is the problem with diaphragmatic injury? That most of the diaphragmatic injury per se are silent. So if the patient is having any other intra-abdominal organ which is injured, so these patients are coming to us with signs and symptoms of other injured intra-abdominal organs. So diaphragmatic injuries per se are silent. Okay, so see the important points. First, what is the most common cause? The most common cause is penetrating injury or penetrating trauma. Okay, so penetrating injury where, right? So if this penetrating injury is below nipple, if it's below nipple or above costal margin, okay, so we have to suspect above costal margin, so we have to suspect the diaphragmatic injury. So we discussed it can be caused by both penetrating trauma as well as blunt trauma, in which cases diaphragmatic injury can occur after blunt trauma. Now imagine if some kind of compressive force is being applied to abdomen or pelvis, right? So etiology, so we discussed that it can be caused by penetrating trauma, which is the most common cause, as well as blunt trauma when compressive forces are being applied to pelvis or abdomen. Because of that there is traumatic rupture. Now coming to clinical findings. So we discussed that diaphragmatic injuries are clinically silent. So as such, diaphragmatic injuries are clinically silent. Most of the injuries are silent. So patients are coming to us, and the patients who are coming to us, they have signs and symptoms of injured other organ. Okay, right? Now see, if a patient is having diaphragmatic injury and if it's silent, okay, and patient is not symptomatic, now what is the problem? There is a late complication. Since there is diaphragmatic rupture or diaphragmatic tear, what happens? The intra-abdominal organs are going to herniate. The late complication of diaphragmatic injury is herniation, right? Now see the organs which are in close relation to diaphragm. So here you can see stomach can herniate, Here transverse colon is there. Transverse colon can herniate or spleen can herniate. Sometimes small intestine, which is mobile, it can herniate. So because of diaphragmatic injury, there is a late complication. So that's why we have to perform the repair. And this late complication is herniation. Clear? So this question is asked that what is the most common organ which is herniated, right? So in herniation, the most common organ which is herniated, and that is stomach, followed by colon. We discussed which colon is the transverse colon, and followed by small intestine. So these are the organs which are herniated. Now diaphragmatic injury was asked 3 to 4 times in PGI Chandigarh. And what was the question? What is the best investigation for diagnosis of diaphragmatic injury? Now see, there is no single best investigation which can confirm the diagnosis of diaphragmatic injury. That's why we perform 2 to 3 investigation or combination of investigations are done to make the diagnosis. But if we have to choose one, so we have to go for laparoscopy. So we can either go for VATS, that is video assisted thoracoscopy. By video assisted thoracoscopy you can visualize the tear, or during laparoscopy you can visualize the tear. What is the advantage of laparoscopy? That you can diagnose the diaphragmatic injury, simultaneously you can diagnose the other intra-abdominal organs which are injured. Okay, so very important point in relation to diagnosis, that there is no single standard investigation. There is no single standard investigation which can confirm the diagnosis or used to confirm the diagnosis of diaphragmatic injury. But most accurate evaluation can be done by, it can be done by either VATS and laparoscopy. Okay, so what is the advantage? By both of these techniques, if we perform VATS or laparoscopy, we can go for the repair of diaphragm, and especially during laparoscopy you can repair the diaphragm, simultaneously you can rule out the other injured intra-abdominal organ, so whether there is injury of some other intra-abdominal organ or not. So what is the treatment? So we discussed the complication is herniation. That's why in all cases we have to go for operative repair. So what's the treatment? It's the operative repair. Clear? There is one triad which is asked in relation to traumatic rupture of diaphragm, and the name of this triad is Bergquist triad. So what are the components of Bergquist triad? There is rib fracture, there is spine or pelvic fracture, and there is traumatic rupture of diaphragm. So the name of triad is Bergquist triad. Okay, now see, what are the components of this Bergquist triad? Rib fracture, there is spine or pelvic fracture, and there is traumatic rupture of diaphragm. Now we are going to discuss blast injuries. Blast injuries are asked in surgery as well as in forensic medicine. Okay, now see what happens in blast injuries. In blast injury, whenever there is bomb blast, there is sudden change of pressure. So because of sudden change of barometric pressure, whatever the structures in the body which are having air, those structures are affected. So because of sudden change in the barometric pressure, what are the structures which are affected? First, middle ear, lungs, and intestine, means GIT, especially the small intestine. So there are two types of blast. One is air blast and one is water blast. Now imagine nothing is given in the question and a question is asked, in blast injury, what is most commonly injured structure and what is most severely injured structure. Then we assume that this is air blast and the most commonly injured structure is tympanic membrane followed by lungs, and most severely injured structure is lungs. But if specifically it is asked that what is the most commonly injured structure in air blast and in water blast, so see. So in blast injuries, what are the organs which are affected? Mainly it's the middle ear, and which structure specifically? Tympanic membrane, lungs and GIT, because all these organs are having air. In blast injury, there is sudden change. So there is sudden change of barometric pressure. Clear? And because of this sudden change of pressure, these organs are affected because these organs are having air. Now, it is of two types: air blast and underwater blast. So air blast and underwater blast. Right? Now see the questions. In air blast, what is the most commonly injured structure? So most commonly injured structure, and that's tympanic membrane followed by lungs. And if question is asked what is the most severely injured, so most severely injured structure is lungs. Simple. Now coming to underwater blast, it is of two types. Now see, whenever there is underwater blast and if the patient is swimming but his head is out of water, so his head is not going to receive these pressure changes, rest of the body is going to receive. So most commonly injured and most severely injured is what? GIT, means small intestine. But if the head is submerged in the water, so when head is submerged, even the tympanic membrane is going to receive the changes, and then most commonly injured is tympanic membrane and most severely injured is small intestine. So two situations. First, when head is out of water, head is out of water. In this case, the most commonly injured and most severely injured, most commonly as well as most severely injured, it's same, GIT. And in GIT, which part? Especially is the small intestine. Clear? And if head is submerged, head is submerged, and if head is submerged, here the most commonly injured is tympanic membrane, most commonly injured, and that's tympanic membrane, but most severely injured is GIT, most severely injured, and that is GIT, especially small intestine. So in the exam, you have to read the question carefully, see the exact language, and then mark the correct answer. Nowadays, lots of questions are asked about ICD insertion, and if you have seen INI CET 2020, there was one image-based question related to water seal, underwater seal used in ICD insertion. So in detail, we are going to discuss the ICD insertion. ICD insertion, that's also known as intercostal drain insertion or chest tube insertion. So we discussed where we are going to insert the ICD: in the triangle of safety, in fifth intercostal space, in anterior axillary line. Okay, now whenever we are inserting the chest tube, can you see this is the fifth intercostal space, so this is fifth rib and this is the sixth rib. So where exactly you are supposed to insert the tube? See, it should be the upper border of lower rib. Why it's upper border of lower rib, not the lower border of upper rib? Because in relation to lower border, there is neurovascular bundle. So if you are going to insert the tube in relation to lower border, you can injure the neurovascular bundle. So the tube should be inserted in relation to upper border of lower rib. Okay. So first thing, it should be inserted in relation to upper border of lower rib. Okay, to prevent the injury of neurovascular bundle. Now how chest tube looks like? So here you can see this is the ICD, intercostal drain or chest tube, and you can notice that these are the holes. These are known as eyes. Clear? Right? And this end, the opposite end of this chest tube, is connected to underwater seal via this connector. So this is connected here via this connector. Right? Now what is the important point? These are the eyes, so we have to make sure that this all eyes should be present in the intrapleural space. So the eyes should be located only in the intrapleural space, otherwise what will happen? There is air leak. So sometimes if the length of this tube is a bit longer and we are not able to keep all the eyes in intrapleural space, so we are going to cut the distal end. Clear? So important point, whenever we are inserting the chest tube, first thing that all eyes should be in the intrapleural space. So during insertion, eyes should be in the pleural space, otherwise there is air leak and it is going to increase the risk of complications. Now when it is connected, what happens when ICD is inserted? So it is going to provide one pathway for evacuation of air and fluid which is collected in the pleural space. Now see how it works. So here you can see that this is the ICD, intercostal drain, and here it is connected to this underwater seal. Okay, and in this image you can see that these are the eyes. So here you can see that all these eyes are in the pleural space. Right? Now it is connected to this underwater seal, so there is a connector, and if you see the tip of this tube, this is the tip. This tip should be at least 2 to 3 centimeter below the underwater seal. So can you see here? We are going to fill this with saline or water. So the tip should be at least 2 to 3 centimeter below underwater seal. At least 2 to 3 centimeter below underwater seal. Right? Whenever you are going to observe any ICD and underwater seal, you are going to notice that what? There is water column. And if you are going to see, there is oscillations in the water column. So how we are going to check the patency of chest tube? We have to see the oscillations in the water column. So if there is oscillations in the water column, it is moving up and down, it means it is patent. Sometimes we have to explain the patient that the moment you are going to notice that this water column is not moving, we have to inform the resident. So if a patient is coming to you and saying that, sir, this water column is not moving, so in which case water column stops moving? So sometimes either tube is blocked, or displaced. Clear? So for functioning, when the tube is patent, this water column should be moving. So what? There should be oscillations in the water column. Okay? So in patent chest tube, there should be oscillations in the water column. If water column stops, so when column movement it stops, it means either the tube is blocked or tube is displaced. Clear? So via this tube, what you notice? You notice that whatever the excess air, whatever the excess fluid is there, slowly it is evacuated, and this is one way. Clear? So what? It is coming out. So if fluid is there, you can notice that the fluid is collected into this underwater seal chamber, and sometimes you are going to notice the bubbling of air. If the air is there, it is coming out just like a bubbles. But in certain situations, you are going to notice excessive bubbling of air. And if there is excessive bubbling of air with each respiratory cycle, it means there is some connection with bronchus. So this is a situation known as bronchopleural fistula. So in bronchopleural fistula, what happens? There is excessive bubbling of air. So another important point, that if there is excessive bubbling of air, it is seen in bronchopleural fistula. Bronchopleural fistula. Now, how we have to confirm whether the position of chest tube is correct and there is resolution of air or fluid? So, which investigation is done to see the position of chest tube and resolution of intrapleural air or fluid? So, generally after chest tube insertion, we have to send the patient for check X-ray. So, what we send? We send the patient for check X-ray. Clear? And by this check X-ray, first you see the position of chest tube. So all the eyes should be in the intrapleural space. So position of chest tube, and second, resolution of intrapleural air or fluid. So resolution of underlying condition means intrapleural fluid or air collection. So we send the patient for chest X-ray. Now there is another situation when you notice that now the lung is completely inflated and within 24 hours hardly there is any drain or any drainage coming out. So whenever the output is less than 200 ml, how much? Less than 200 ml within 24 hours, and the lung is completely inflated. In these cases we can remove the chest tube. So what are the indications of chest tube removal? So ICD can be removed when lung is fully expanded, and whenever the drain output is less than 200 ml in 24 hours. Okay, so we can consider the ICD removal. Okay, now whenever we are removing the ICD, intercostal drain, we are going to ask the patient to hold the breath at the peak of inspiration. So when patient is going to hold the breath at peak of inspiration, then only we are going to remove the chest tube. So ICD removal should be done when patient holds the breath at peak of inspiration. Then in which situation you consider the removal of chest tube? So we go for a check X-ray, and on check X-ray you are going to see that lung is fully expanded, or the drain output is less than 200 ml within 24 hours. So lung is fully expanded and the drain output is less than 200 ml in 24 hours, then we consider the removal. And whenever we are removing the chest tube, we ask the patient to hold the breath at the peak of inspiration, and then we remove the chest tube. Okay, so when we consider the ICD removal, generally when the lungs are fully expanded, so lung is fully expanded and we can check it on X-ray, and there is drain output less than 200 ml within 24 hours. Okay, and whenever we are going to remove the ICD chest tube, we ask the patient to hold the breath, and it should be removed when patient is holding the breath at peak of inspiration. So patient holds the breath at peak of inspiration. So this is a favorite question of AIIMS people, that what is the ideal time of drain removal? So generally in thyroidectomy, in how many days or how many hours we are going to remove? So after 24 hours we are going to remove the drain in thyroidectomy. See ideal times for drain removal. So ideal times for drain removal: first, thyroidectomy. So in thyroidectomy we remove the drain after 24 hours. Okay, we discussed ICD. So whenever the drain output is less than 200 ml, when it is less than 200 ml in 24 hours. Clear? In mastectomy, generally it is removed after 5 days. So in cases of mastectomy, drain is removed after 5 days. Right? In colorectal anastomosis, generally it is removed after 7 days. So in cases of colorectal anastomosis, it is removed after 7 days. 7 days. And we discussed T-tube, Kehr's T-tube, and Kehr's T-tube is generally removed after 7 to 10 days. So T-tube, and generally it is removed after 7 to 10 days. Okay, so this is about ideal time for drain removal. So this is all about neck and thoracic injuries.